Michelle Obonsawin made history last September when she became the first Indigenous person appointed to sit on the Supreme Court of Canada. But Justice Obonsawin was a trailblazer long before her nomination. She is an accomplished jurist and legal scholar, educator, and a champion for mental health. She earned a master's and a PhD, all while working full-time and raising her two boys. In 2017, she became the first Indigenous justice named to Ontario Superior Court. But as one of Canada's brightest legal minds, Justice Obonsawin doesn't want to be just a token Indigenous judge. And recently, I did sit down for a more personal conversation with Michelle Obonsawin. Madam Justice, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
I want to begin with a simple question, because your life seems to have changed so drastically, so quickly. Are you adjusting?
I am. It has been an adjustment, I can't lie. The last 3 months are a bit of a whirlwind, actually. Yeah.
And what was that like? I can't imagine what it would be like for someone to reach out to say that you're being considered, and then to get a subsequent phone call to say, oh, you have the job. What was that like?
It was surreal, because you always hope, but I've always said I was a long shot. So for me to actually get the call was amazing, because that little hope was inside, and then it came a reality. It was surreal.
It's interesting for you to say that you thought you were a long shot, because I think once people saw the nomination, many people just nodded their head. It makes perfect sense. Why did you think you were a long shot?
Well, I know a lot of people always think that the regular trajectory is you've either worked in a larger firm or you've gone to the Court of Appeal. I've always worked my whole career in-house, and I know that from my understanding, no one has ever sat on the Supreme Court that worked like me, always in-house as a litigator. So that was something very different. And then afterwards, I didn't sit on the Court of Appeal. So it was a leapfrog that I thought I could do, but I wasn't sure if others believed that too.
Well, I do want to ask about that, this internal belief, because when you were speaking to the parliamentarians taking part in the question and answer period, you were very clear. You said from a young age, as a little girl, you had dreamed of becoming a lawyer. But did you ever dream of ascending to such a big position?
I had always wanted to be a lawyer. That was a done deal. When I was 9, I had decided that. To be a judge, really, it started to be a possibility or a thought. When I was in my first year of law school, we had someone from the commissioner's office come in our class of legislation, talk to us to explain how do you become a judge. So you had to be a lawyer at least 10 years, you had to have a good reputation. And someone asked him, so what's the perfect judge? And he said, well, it's a bilingual Aboriginal woman. I thought, hey, that's me. And then all of a sudden I thought, wow, why didn't I think of this before? I could actually do that. I could one day aspire to be a judge. And then the dream just started from there.
Why didn't you think of it before, do you think?
I don't know, like I come from very modest means, so my family was not a family of professionals, of lawyers and doctors, etc. My dad was a head machinist at Inco, my mom was a teacher, my dad's brothers all worked at Inco, and so when you come from that background, it's not necessarily something you think. And when I had said to my guidance counselor that I wanted to be a lawyer, he told me, Michelle, think about it twice, because you come from a small town in Northern Ontario. It's likely not going to happen. And that's when I thought, well, listen, watch me go, because this is going to happen. I'm going to make it happen. But being a judge, that was at another level.
Yeah. Well, what is the reaction then in your hometown of Hamner, in Sudbury, Ontario, your family? How are they reacting to all of this?
They're ecstatic, and I laugh because every once in a while a cousin or my aunt will say, oh my God, someone asked me if we're related, because they know that, we have the same name. So they're really proud.
Now, really proud, and that makes sense, because without a doubt, you're a trailblazer. You are the first Indigenous person to sit in the Supreme Court. You're an Indigenous woman, Franco-Ontarian. But in that same question and answer period that you took part in with parliamentarians, you're very clear, despite all those modifiers and the elements of who you are first and foremost a judge.
Absolutely.
Why that distinction?
It's important because when you're a judge, you're impartial. And there can't be the perception that because you're Indigenous, you're going to go a certain way when you hear Indigenous matters. If you're a brown person, you're going to hear matters a certain way and make a certain decision. So just because we have unique backgrounds doesn't make us predisposed to make a decision in a certain fashion. You make a decision based on the case that's put forward in front of you. So that's why it was important for me to say I am a judge first. I am, of course, all these other things, and it'll nourish my perspective, but it's not an absolute.
It's that double standard, isn't it, though? Because if you are a man, if you are of European background, these are perhaps considerations that wouldn't come to people's minds.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah. So does it make you uncomfortable then when people do describe you as a trailblazer, when they praise you for the glass ceilings that you're breaking by taking on this role?
I understand why some say that, but then I want people to know, too, that I hope they don't have the perception that I'm only at the Supreme Court because I'm an Indigenous person. I worked 17 years as an in-house litigator. I appeared at different levels of tribunals and courts. I did my master's and my PhD while working full-time first as a lawyer, then afterwards sitting on the Superior Court of Justice for 5 years, and while doing my PhD full-time. So I think I bring more than just being an Indigenous woman.
Do you feel the pressure of it, though, because you are still an Indigenous woman? Mm-hmm. You are a jurist. You now sit in the top court in this country. You're still an Indigenous woman. Do you feel any pressure from the community on that level?
I think it's just normal, right? People want to see themselves reflected on the court, and they're hoping that their point of views are going to be brought through that person. So, of course, there's always that weight, and you live under the microscope, but I've always said I have wide shoulders, and that's fine.
So where does your indigeneity fit in? How does it fit into your work now and your work in the past?
In the past, it was very much a part of me under the 94 calls to action from the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was really important to have that aspect of education about Indigenous issues, and I took that to heart because there's two components that are amongst others. There's education and justice. So I had my own personal mandate to educate as many jurists and lawyers, people in the legal field, about GLADU principles, how they work, how we have high incarceration rates, how Indigenous people are impacted, their mental health is impacted by intergenerational trauma and direct trauma related to residential schools. So I thought that was very important, and I took that to heart, and I did that during my legal career as a lawyer. But I did also continue that also as a jurist, because I think it's important for colleagues who are sentencing Indigenous people to know what GLADU principles are, how they work, and what the roles and responsibilities are of every person in that courtroom. So the judge has obligations, as noted by the GLADU and IPELI Supreme Court of Canada decisions, but also the lawyers that appear there, the different workers, the social workers, all those that work in the criminal justice system. Everyone has a role to play.
Mm-hmm. So how will that guide you, the GLADU principle? How will that factor into the work you do here in the Supreme Court?
I think it's an added knowledge that I have. It's an expertise that I've really worked on in the past 20 years throughout my career. So I think any knowledge that we have in addition to just our regular base as jurists is always beneficial.
Mm-hmm. You're not yet 50. Mandatory retirement for a Supreme Court judge is 75. You have the opportunity to spend some time in this court to influence, to contribute to Canadian society in a way that others don't. At this point, what do you hope your contribution will be?
I hope my contribution is just going to bring that unique perspective as an Indigenous person, a Franco-Ontarian from a small town. These are things that are part of my identity, and to bring that to this court, and I'm hoping to be known as a hardworking judge, someone who's just, who listens well and also writes thoughtful decisions. Mm-hmm.
Now the court is slowly starting to truly reflect what Canadian society looks like. How important is that, do you think?
I think it's important because everyone, as part of society, wants to see public institutions or see themselves actually in public institutions. And the Supreme Court is part of that process, right? We're part of those institutions. So for us to have diversity on our court is really important.
Are there any challenges you hope the court takes on in your time here?
That's a good question. I don't know if there are things specific.
You think so.
I wouldn't say there are things specific, because we have all kinds of interesting issues that are going to be coming in front of this court. We have issues on climate change, I'm sure, environmental issues, Indigenous issues, human rights, privacy. Like, there are so many interesting issues that this court deals with, and I think it's going to be an interesting 20 plus years for me at this court.
And your appointment, of course, a huge acknowledgement of all that you have accomplished. And really, I don't know where you find the time. You're a jurist, you are a doctor of laws, you are a spouse, a mother, you have 3 dogs, 9 chickens, and a gecko. Again, I don't know how you do it. Does that reality say anything about your desire to always be engaged?
I think that it shows that I'm hardworking, and you know what's beneficial? I don't sleep a lot, so I'm able to do all these things.
What's your average sleep time?
4 to 5 hours of consecutive sleep, I think, is a good night.
Good for you. I don't know how you do it. Your appointment also comes at a time, you referenced it, that this country is starting this path of reconciliation, and really just starting. Do you think about the history that's being made by your appointment? Do you think about the influence your appointment will have on young girls across the country, on Indigenous youth across the country?
I'm hoping it will inspire them, because not everyone comes from a big city. A lot of people come from remote areas, and for them to know that it's a possibility. If you dream big and work hard, you can get there. It's a possibility. If I did it, I think anyone else can too.
Have you gone back to your hometown since the appointment was announced?
I have. It's been great, I have to say. I've seen friends, I've seen different people who I worked with in the past, tons of family members, and yeah, everyone's rejoicing. We're all happy.
That's good to hear. I think it's fair to say that we all stand on the shoulders of giants, be they parents, grandparents, ancestors, mentors, people who blazed the path forward to begin with, who fought for the right to be acknowledged and for the right to succeed. Whose shoulders do you stand on?
I have been very fortunate that in the past few years I've stood on the shoulders of giants like Murray Sinclair, Phil Fontaine. They've been a huge influence on me. I've also had the great mentorship of Justice Charles Hackland, who was on my court prior to my arrival here. He was actually the first judge who called me when the news came out that I had been appointed to the Superior Court, to remind me that when I had applied to the court, he was one of my references. He said, don't forget, I offered my mentorship, and I think that his mentorship made me the judge I am today, actually.
How so?
He taught me how to be respectful, to listen when you have parties that appear in front of you, because their stories are really important to them. And for us, it's not about just giving our opinion, it's to listen to their stories and then interpret the law and apply the law to it. But I think being respectful, and one of the things that's really important is to be a good, clear, concise writer. And I think that those are really valuable things that I've learned from them.
You mentioned clear, concise writing, and it makes me think about the first decision that you'll one day write. How daunting is that idea?
It's very daunting, and I have to say, though, I feel a bit more zen about it as I'm in my 3rd month, because I'm really surrounded by brilliant people, and a lot of my colleagues have really said, you know, if you have questions, come and see me. If there are things that you want to bounce off of us. So I feel really well surrounded on that aspect, and I don't feel really afraid to ask questions, because I've always thought I'm going to learn by asking questions at times, and I feel comfortable to do that even here.
What was that first day like here? Did it feel like the first day of school, being back, you know, here you are, this accomplished jurist? But you must feel like a little girl again in such a grand room in front of people who play such an important role in this country.
It's amazing, and I have to say, my adventure started off on a different foot. Like Justice Cassiera, for example, who started off in Winnipeg. I started off in Quebec City. So it was a different environment because we were sitting in the Court of Appeal there. And I remember at the back, we took a little picture of a few of us together in preparation for my first day. And I remember when the door opened and they called La Cour and we walked in, I have that sense of pride. And then when it was here, and I point here in back of us, when the double doors open and you hear La Cour, like, this is something you see on TV. It's not necessarily something you're a part of. Whereas here it was something different. I was actually a part of that court now. So to walk in after hearing that, to take my place amongst the 9 others, I felt a huge sense of pride. And I was emotional. I actually got a bit teary-eyed when those doors first opened and I walked in. It was marvelous.
I talked about standing on the shoulders of giants. You're a mother of 2 sons. What do you hope they take away from your experience and your journey?
I hope they're going to be proud. I hope they're going to learn that you always persevere and start what you finish. Because, for example, when I started off my PhD, I had started off as a lawyer. And then I took 2 years off to learn how to be a good judge in the Superior Court. And I went back to it. And one of the reasons I went back to it is I really wanted to show my sons that when you start something, persevere. It's not always going to be difficult. It's not always going to be easy, but you're going to get there. And it was important to show them that path. So I hope that they learn that. And they learn that from myself, from having made mistakes, for them to know that it's not fatal. You get up again, you keep walking, and you persevere. So I hope that some of my values that I'm trying to show them is going to impact and stay with them.
Mm-hmm. Along with 3 dogs, 9 chickens, and a gecko.
Yeah, that too.
Oh, by the way, you also talked about getting a cat to add to the coterie of pets.
I did, but I have to say, since that time, we've had further family discussions, and I think instead of getting the cat, I'm trying to convince him now to get a 4th dog, so stay tuned.
Maybe one day he'll be in court with you.
That's right, you never know.
Thank you so much for the time, and congratulations again.
Thank you. Uliini.